Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Sobyl Bunis, the founder of the Emotional Clearinghouse. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here today for a conversation that we're calling Mental Health in the Time of COVID. Now, I know when you hear that, you know it's a huge topic. The past 2 years of this pandemic have created tremendous amounts of emotional pain and struggle worldwide. We truly are in a global mental health crisis. So we have a lot to talk about today. Now, we're very fortunate that I have a very dear friend and a very respected colleague joining us today. Her name is Beth McDonald from Santa Barbara. And she is a business consultant, she is an astrologer, and she is a corporate intuitive among her many, many skills. Now, the beauty is that Beth and I have been collaborating with our clients for over 35 years. So we have a long and wonderful relationship. And I'll tell you, we do love to talk. So we love to talk and have these deep conversations and share them with you. But I want to assure all of you that besides our love of conversing, Beth and I have really both dedicated ourselves professionally and personally to finding real solutions to real problems and to bringing hope in a very practical way. So hopefully this will be a meaningful conversation for all of us today. So before I bring Beth along personally with her own introduction, I'm going to do a very brief little bit of background about myself. Beth is going to share some background about herself, and then we're going to dive right into this very, very big and wonderful topic of conversation. So Dr. Sobyl Bunis, I've been in practice for 35 years as a holistic family doctor and chiropractor. And I was very fortunate in my training. Right from the beginning, I was taught that the emotional, mental, and spiritual side of health was every bit as important as physical health in terms of our overall well-being. And right when I got out of school in 1986, I was trained in a process called emotional clearing. And what it has to do with is the fact that when we go through trauma in our lives, when we're younger especially, our bodies will hold on to a memory of that trauma. And then over time, as we go through life, things that happen in our day-to-day lives will remind us of that original trauma. It will trigger the imprint of that trauma and wake up all these old and painful emotions. And it can affect us on almost any level of our lives. You know, some of you know the expression PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's basically what it is. And most of us are experiencing some level of holding emotional trauma in our bodies, in our nervous systems. And certainly these past 2 years of the COVID pandemic have really triggered a lot of people emotionally. So I'm dedicating the rest of my professional life to bringing emotional clearing to a global community. And that's why I'm doing these interviews in this podcast today. So I want to welcome Beth McDonald. I want to give her a chance to give a sense of her background, and then we're going to dive in. So welcome, Beth, and let people know for your gifts and your brilliance.
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for having me. And I'd like to thank our audience for being here and all the tech folks who are helping us do this, because you're awesome and we're grateful, and you're making all this possible. Psychic abilities run in my family on both sides for generations, but they kind of had a very complex relationship with it because of a variety of socioeconomic and cultural factors. And I never intended to be a professional psychic. I went to college. I got a degree in English literature. I became a writer for local periodicals. And then people started bringing me business projects, and I turned out to be good at it. And so I started doing a lot of marketing and management consulting. And that's when I first met Sobyl, because I could make the best business and marketing plan for people, but if for whatever reason they couldn't stick to it, or they couldn't do it, or they were sabotaging themselves in some way, it was useless. And I was heartbroken. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's more to showing up in the world than just having a plan. You know, you have to be able to access your wisdom in a clean, clear way. And when we're upset or when we're having a PTSD response, you can't do that. And then shortly after that, I had a series of life experiences that unlocked the psychic piece, and I couldn't keep it tamped down anymore. So then I spent a couple of years kind of going back to to school per se with different psychics and mental health professionals and mentors, energy workers, rabbis, priests, ministers, shaman, the whole bit, to just really anchor that in. And so that took things to the next level. And then I took up astrology just as a lark, and I never expected to use it. And that has turned out to be one of the most helpful things, because it, there's many reasons, but for our purposes today, one of the most important things is that it can tell you on a deep soul level what some of your greatest wounds are emotionally. And so one of the ways that Sobyl and I can work so well together is, I can be working with a client on their marketing or business plan, but they're struggling. And then I notice they have an indicator for a lot of old anger. And then it's like, okay, we make a list, send that to Sobyl. Sobyl takes the list as a launching point, but then she uses her skills and talents and goes even deeper. And so between the two of us and our skill sets, we can do a lot for a lot of different people. And we've never felt so called to do so as we do right now. So
right now.
So thank you.
Yeah. So I'm so glad you're here. I'm sorry you're not in Hawaii like you were last time, because when you were in Hawaii, I could imagine that I was there with you in the bomb.
And the chickens. We have the chickens.
You had chickens. Yeah. All right, everybody. So we are ready to roll with this beautiful topic, mental health in the time of COVID. And it's so big. And we had to start by breaking it down, Beth and I figured that we would really focus in on a couple of really big pieces today. We're going to talk a lot about grief, and we're going to talk a lot about fear of missing out, what people call FOMO. Anyway, that's what we're going to get into when we get deep into the content. But before we get there, we wanted to start and just talk about how in our particular country, in our particular culture, we have not really prioritized mental health. And between not prioritizing mental health, number one, and a lot of the cultures within our country carry a lot of shame around the idea of expressing emotions, asking for help, or even needing help. So those two things have merged and created a real problem for people who are desperate for help, but either don't know they need it or don't know how to ask it, or are too ashamed to ask for it. And so there's something about this pandemic that has ramped up the intensity of life to such a degree that now people are starting to really recognize, oh, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is not just for war veterans. All of us are experiencing things that are traumatic, and it might actually even be reminding us of things from the past that we carry as wounds. And so it's more necessary than ever to be seeking help. And it's something that really is changing our country in a positive way, that people are recognizing, yes, they have a problem. Yes, it's on the emotional level. And yes, it's okay to ask for help. So Beth, when we were talking the other day, you brought up this really interesting piece about public policy and mental health. And I wish you would share that with our audience, because I think it's pretty fascinating and it says a lot about who we are.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot of these sorts of things when my son went to college and got a degree in political science. And then it was like, oh, you know how it is with your kids. You're always learning from them. And a lot of what he was saying and sharing with me helped me understand pieces that I was getting from my international clients that didn't make sense for me. I had Americans moving to Europe 10, 15 years ago to start a family and raise a kid because they had relatives in Germany or Italy, and their public policies are much more supportive of families. And especially, they are really, I truly appreciate how they are reflective of medical and psychological science around the importance of parental bonding with their children, especially in the period immediately after birth, then the next couple of years, and especially between birth and 5 years old. And other countries have created public policies that are more supportive of that. mothers and fathers get paid maternal leave, paid paternal leave. So the mother and the father can either take turns or, create the structure they need to really be home with the baby and bond in those crucial early times. They also get, more vacation. They get 6 weeks of vacation a year plus holidays and sick time and that sort of thing, which again reduces the stress level in the family home and allows families to create stronger bonds. One of the most important science pieces for me has to do with how there is just this growing body of evidence that one of the biggest indicators of mental health has to do with that maternal-child bond and how things are during the pregnancy, during the birth, during the first couple of years. And that bond is what creates resiliency. I actually had a mental health professional talk to me at one point and say, look, if you are bonded with your child, you can basically handle anything. And so in my work with people, I am consistently, especially families that are young couples that are trying to start a family, or couples who already have kids who are struggling to manage stress. It's really important. And I was heartened that our president in the State of the Union was addressing this head on and is trying to put money towards this and give families more options and give them a leg up, give them a fighting chance for mental health.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So
yeah.
So now we want to take a look at this whole notion of shame around mental health issues. And I remember growing up, when I went to college, I remember I was feeling some kind of whatever it was, some kind of angst. I didn't understand what was going on. But the idea of going and asking for help, of going into, the clinic at school and getting a therapist to work with me, my brain said to me, no, you're supposed to be able to figure everything out yourself. You're not supposed to have to ask anybody for help. I don't remember being taught that specifically, but that's in our culture. This idea that we should be able to figure things out for ourselves, which of course is, now of course I understand it was completely wrong and completely misleading. But also there's a real shame that a lot of cultures carry around just showing emotion, being emotional, or not being able to manage your emotions. So I want to hear what you had to say about that as well.
Yeah, that's where you and I come from very similar backgrounds, where there was such shame, such stigma about emotions and not being able to control your emotions. And literally it's viewed to be a sign of weakness, not only that is a reflection on you, but it's a reflection on the family. And it's weaker and stronger in different cultures. It's weaker and stronger in different genetic lines. It's a very personal piece that you and I have really found most people carry to some degree. And so when you're looking at beginning or continuing your mental health journey, one of the things you want to look at is, as a starting place, is how comfortable am I with asking for help? How comfortable am I with getting help? And the one thing I say over and over and over again is, like, once you get comfortable, nobody has to know. It's between you and your practitioners or your support team. You don't have to wear it on a t-shirt. You do not have to broadcast it to the whole world. You just have to focus on yourself, what your mind and your heart and your soul and your body need. And your only responsibility is to give yourself what you need to be the best possible person on this planet.
Right. And in terms of having a lot of emotions being stirred up and how you're supposed to deal with that, I mean, even looking at the gender issue, Like so many men in our culture have been taught, suck it up, boys don't cry, just keep it, just suck it up, right? And women have been taught to be caretakers. And so you take whatever emotions might be going on and you stuff them inside and you just keep going.
And take whatever anybody's dishing out. Like you are taught to defer, to demur, to endure, to and to just suck it up, stuff it down, and then pretend not to notice when it manifests in weird ways.
Exactly. And in my work with people, I know a lot of them have told me when we do emotional clearing and we go into their past experience, they told me that when they were younger and they would actually try to express a feeling, they had those feelings invalidated by the adults in their life. Oh, you don't feel that way. Oh, that's not true. Or just not wanting to hear it. But a lot of people had their feelings invalidated, which is another way of teaching people to not express themselves emotionally or even recognize that they have emotions that need to be expressed, or that recognizing that they might need help in that emotional arena.
Oh, yeah. And now this is where it gets really, really subtle. I'm seeing this a lot now with the older generation. Okay. Now that there's COVID and a lot of elderly people are aging faster than they would normally. And so families are having to have these accelerated conversations about, what are we dealing with mom? And should she be living alone? And who's she going to live with? And what are we going to do? But in the process of having those conversations, I'm seeing a lot of those old patterns come up where literally, like, you're sharing, why you want to get mom extra support, so she won't fall down or dent the car or hurt somebody or something. And she says, oh, well, you shouldn't be worried about that. That the invalidation is so subtle. And it's so ingrained. And it's like, no, mama, your job is not to tell me that I shouldn't feel that or I shouldn't worry about that. That's my stuff. Your job is to say, oh my gosh, I'm listening. I'm listening. It's really, and that gets really triggering for people. Like you think you're over it, and then you get into those conversations and they say those phrases that they said when you were 2 and 3 and 4 years old. You shouldn't feel that way. And it's like, no, you don't get to tell me what I should and should not feel. Right. You get to say, I'm sorry you're upset. Where do we go from here? What do we do? Yeah. And it's just like COVID has pulled back the curtain and showed us exactly where we're golden and where we still got work to do. And it's no shame. It's okay. You're human, you're human in a weird time in history. And this is just what that looks like.
Right. And you're in very good company because
we're all doing it.
So I really want to dive into really looking at grief, because grief, you and I spoke about this the other day. Where do we want to start? There's so many different emotional levels. We could start with grief. We could start with anger and frustration, depression. There's so many different places we could start, but grief is so huge right now. And along with that, we're using this expression, fear of missing out, because there's grief and fear of missing out have certain places where they intersect. But I want to start with the big word grief and really dive into it, because the obvious thing, of course, is those of us who have lost loved ones. There's the grief of losing someone you love. And because of COVID, there's the added grief of maybe you didn't get to be with them while they were dying. You couldn't go into the hospital, or you couldn't visit your home state and be with them. You couldn't go to the funeral. You couldn't participate in some of these grieving rituals, religious rituals. Everybody was doing that on their own or over Zoom.
Right.
There's the grief. So that's people that we've lost. And of course, that talking about the missing out and the missing of things, then that leads to what you and I were talking about. It's the holidays, and mom or dad or a sibling or a friend are no longer there at the table. So you're literally missing that person. There's an emptiness, there's a space, and it's painful. I think that grief has so many layers. I want to just pass it over to you to share some of the layers that you're looking at with grief. And then we're going to look at all the different ways that grief plays out and how you can recognize whether you, in fact, are grieving or need to grieve. So can you just talk a little bit more about some of the different layers of grief that you recognize?
I'm happy to, and part of that is because it's been a great learning for me. I do a lot of work in hospice with death midwifery and being a death doula, and so I kind of had this arrogance that I was like up to snuff on a lot of things. It's not my primary occupation, but it's a niche that I have. And so when COVID first started happening 2 years ago, a lot of my colleagues in the hospice community really were talking about grief and only grief. And I was like, hey, there's a lot more going on here. And they were like, no, you got to start with this. And so it took me a while to get on board. And now I'm truly converted. And here we are. So with that said, one of the humans are, of course, the primary grief, the loss of these souls that we love. But there's a whole lot of other complex griefs that are happening concurrently. So it's like this big grief sandwich kind of. And well, the first one that always comes up is the loss of innocence. You know, whatever our personal denial bubbles were, you know, or layers and levels of them, we've all had to let that go to a certain degree. Some of it's been quick, some of it's been slow, some of it's been a lot, some of it hasn't, you know, but like we're grieving a loss of innocence that's just now kind of gone forever. Part of that has to do with grieving the loss of the world we knew. And another set of that is, especially, I see this so much for people our age who are people who are retirees or about to retire, the loss of the future we thought we'd have. You know, it's different now, and we have to change the way we're investing, the way we're saving, the way we're spending, the way we're having contact with humans. And there's a lot of grief around that, and that segues to the next one, which is our loss of freedom. We're all grieving to some degree or another the loss of the personal freedoms that we had to travel, to move about, to not wear a mask, to wear a mask, you know, whatever. And then close to that is the loss of our bodies as we knew them, our health as we knew them. Our bodies are changing. Our health is changing. The things we're having to do to take care of our bodies and stay healthy is changing. And there's a deep, profound grief with that. The possibility that we may have a shorter life than we imagined, or that the remainder of our lives may be less pleasant than we had imagined. There's an extraordinary amount of grief there. And so, the last piece that you and I see daily is grieving how difficult it is to find good quality, timely medical information and practitioners that we can trust and feel safe with, because there are so many different opinions, and it's just really hard grieving how hard it is.
It's hard. And when you were talking about the grief about the loss of the future, I see that happening for every age. I was just on this road trip, and I was in Flagstaff, and I met a young man. We were in conversation at a coffee shop, of course. That's where you get into conversations with all sorts of wonderful new friends. And he's 21, he's in college, and he's talking about all of the things that, you know, as a 20 or 21-year-old that he would have had in his life that would have been just these wonderful open experiences that got shut down. And I think back, you know, because I'm no longer 21, it's been a while, but I could look back, and I said to him, I said, you know, my heart breaks for you. I said, first of all, because I remember when I was 21, and I remember the amount of freedom I had. And because
it was glorious.
It was a tremendous amount of freedom. And I'm going to say, air quotes, a relatively safe world to do it in.
Right.
We got away with some things that maybe you wouldn't get away with now, just the idea of what I went through. But I can look at him, and I remember at that age feeling like everything was so imminent and urgent. And if it didn't happen now, it was never going to happen. And I said to him, I said, you know, looking back from all the years, that where I'm looking back to 21, I said, the thing that I have that you can't possibly understand is the sense of perspective and relativity that you get over the course of a lifetime. So my heart breaks for you because I know that, like, for example, if you're in high school, you have one opportunity for the senior prom.
Right.
And if you miss that, you've missed it.
It's
and
gone.
These iconic moments in an American child's life, usually, like going through high school and getting out of high school and having the prom and having the graduation, and all of these moments in time are being missed, and there's no way to go back and regain them. And I remember the pain of that age, of anything that I felt I was losing out, missing out on. It was excruciating.
Right.
Compared to now, I go, whatever. I've already had so much, and I have more to look forward to. But I can look back and say I've had all of the iconic moments of a lifetime, to really to say it's a satisfying life. So it is heartbreaking for me to see what's happening to younger people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It really is. So Beth, let's take a look at some of the different ways that grief manifests, because we were talking about, it's so obvious to see, someone's grieving and they're crying and they're weeping or they're sad, right? That's the obvious way that we recognize grief. But you were talking about fatigue, and I was talking about yearning.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to just mention the emotion of yearning, which you were talking about, pining for something and yearning for something.
Yeah.
But in my work, when people come up with that feeling of really yearning for something, it's so different than just desiring something. Like, you can desire something and go get it. You can want something and go get it. But when you're yearning for something, the underbelly of yearning is this belief and this feeling that you can never have it. And I think the grief of what we're going through in these times right now is bringing that feeling up a lot for people. Like, they are seeing, I can never have this thing I always wanted. So it's a very, very excruciating form of desire for something. It's very painful. And I see that a lot. And you were talking about how you're seeing fatigue and exhaustion, which I'm seeing too in my practice. Could you address that fatigue for a moment?
Yeah. And there's a connection. Because of COVID and the way the world is changing and the way it's forcing us to live more from our values, that requires us to be clear about what they are, which is an exhausting process in and of itself.
Right.
Because, like we've talked about, younger people are having to use more discernment, be more discerning, be more particular about what they are choosing to pursue, or risk management. Where are they risk averse? Where are they not? This is the kind of thing that young people don't normally spend time on, and to the degree that older folks do. And so just that yearning, sifting, sorting process is exhausting, but then facing all the changes we're having to face and just facing our own emotion is exhausting. This was another thing it took me time to really wrap my head around and understand, but some of the biggest presenting problems that mental and physical health professionals are experiencing in clients and patients is the concept of exhaustion, physical exhaustion, mental and emotional exhaustion. And everybody's talking about how tired they are, even though they may be getting more sleep or spending more time in bed. And the thing I find myself saying to people is that change is exhausting. Stress is exhausting. The world is changing at such a rapid rate, and dealing with our own emotions, dealing with our own selves is exhausting. Dealing with COVID life, everything's slower now. We can't always get the products or the services that we want when we want them the way we used to. And then accepting that, making peace with that, making choices around that. It's just exhausting. And so the first thing I want to do is just validate people that if you're tired, you're tired and let yourself rest. But also, that's when you pick up the phone and you call Sobyl, because there are things she can do to help clear you out so it's not so tiring, both physically and mentally and emotionally.
Yeah, I think that part of what we want to share with people is this idea of being able to recognize, become aware within yourself that you are feeling grief or some other powerful negative emotion. And a lot of people have been so trained to keep that inside, to not recognize it, to not allow for it. So I know you and I were talking the other day about how valuable it is for people to start to recognize that they are having these deep sense of loss, deep sense of pain, deep emotional emotions coming up. And it's really well worth everybody's time to stop at least a couple of times a day. If you can find that moment by yourself. I know for a lot of people, they're surrounded by other people. They're surrounded by, family members, and they don't have the room, but somewhere in your day to stop and take that moment and just take a couple of breaths and ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Am I, or like you said, just have that like a fill in the blank. I am feeling, and see if you can fill it in and see if these emotions pop up. And to really, I kind of hate the expression, give yourself permission. It seems so, I don't know. It's
dated. It seems really dated.
It's dated, but it always felt odd to me. But the idea of allowing yourself to really feel and to really sink in, I had, and you know this, but I'll share this with our audience. Over 6 years ago, I lost my sister. And for any of you who lost a sibling, it's a very different experience than losing a parent. You expect to lose your parents. You expect that your parents are going to die. But a sibling, it's a different experience altogether. And when I lost her, it hit me really hard. And I had a wonderful advisor who said to me, Sobyl, you really need to let yourself grieve. And I did. And I became exhausted. I couldn't practice very much. My patients were fabulous. I would call them up and say, would it be okay if I worked with you next week? They granted me a lot of grace. I slept a lot. I ate things that I never usually eat. I called it grief pizza. What can I say? That was my little, humor, because my sister had very dark humor. So for me, grief pizza was kind of a way of honoring her dark humor.
Yeah.
So what happened was, as I really allowed myself to feel all the depth of that loss, I started to feel loss of things from my life that I had never fully addressed. And it's like it opened a portal of grieving. And it took me some time. It wasn't easy. I was really down. I was really exhausted. And when I would pop up, I would get up, I would work, I would do my normal day, and then I would go down again. And that went on for a period of time. But when I got through it, I felt like a different person in a very, very positive way. And the loss of her is still the loss of her. There are times when I get a wave of missing her and crying, but it's nothing like what I went through 6 years ago. But I really allowed for it. And you know what? Maybe I had more freedom than some people. I'm self-employed, and I have flexibility in terms of allowing myself that kind of time. But I would say that for people who are really suffering the loss of a loved one, as much as you can allow yourself the time to really sink in and to recognize that some of what you feel may be related to things from the past that you never had a chance to deal with.
And I just want to reiterate and reinforce that emotion plays out for different people very differently. And one of the things I learned from the conscious living, conscious dying community is that grief is the most rangy. It's the most squirrely. It comes and it goes. It's different for every individual, and it's different for every individual for every loss.
Right.
Like you grieve, like you were saying, you grieve the loss of your sister differently than your high school friend or your ex or your college buddy or the gal down the street. It's just different. And one of the places I first started to learn about grief, one of the times was in a series of astrological transits that are not unlike what we're going through right now. And it was 2000 and 2001 with the 9/11 and the war and all that kind of stuff. And I would get people coming in and they would tell me a story, you know, and then I would be like, okay, how does this make you feel? And then they would tell me the same story in different words. And I was like, no. How does that make you feel? Can you fill in the blank? I feel blank. And what I realized that most adults can't do that because they were not taught, they were not given permission.
Right.
And so just I know we're going to talk about tools a little later, but like step one tool is like, give yourself permission to stop, take a breath, and just check in. How do I feel? And then know that it kind of bifurcates and trifurcates, you know, how your head feels is going to be different than how your heart feels sometimes, and different from how your body feels. And that's where I just adore the work of Frank Ostaseski, because he was the one who came up with that little ritual. How does my head feel? How does my heart feel? How does my body feel? What does my head need? What does my heart need? What does my body need? And can I give myself that anytime soon? You know, because sometimes we can right there in real time, but sometimes if you're on a break from your job, you kind of can't. You just have to keep track of it until it's appropriate. But it's the first step. And if you struggle with that, again, I want to tell you, you're in good company. You're not bad and wrong. You haven't failed in any way. You just weren't taught. And one of the blessings of this time is now you have permission to learn the things you've needed and wanted to know for a long time. And we're here to help, you know, as are a gazillion other people. So
exactly.
Yeah.
We're all in the same boat. And I think the nature of this pandemic has brought home more than ever this notion that we are one interconnected community. There's just no way of believing anything else. I mean, we are connected on the most profound levels. And, you know, there are some days where I'll be exhausted and I'll look around and I'll see a lot of my friends feel exhausted, and there's no reason for feeling exhausted. In other words, it's not that I didn't get sleep or I just did a 100-mile bike ride, you know, nothing where I could point a finger and say, oh, that would normally exhaust me. But I think it's very true that we become and are becoming more and more sensitive to the energy of the emotional pain around us. People are in a lot of pain. And it's not, you know, for some people, they're not sensitive to it. They don't feel it. That's okay. But a lot of people are. You know, we talk about the canary in the mine, that expression of how the miners would go down into the mine and they would carry a canary in a cage. And the reason they did is because that canary was sensitive to the poisonous gas that comes from, you know, the mining process in certain situations. And it would kill the canary because people couldn't smell it, but the canary would die. And the miners would know to get the, you know, get out of the mine, and it would save their lives. But a lot of people are like that canary. They're sensitive. They're more sensitive than the rest of the population. And we as a culture don't value sensitivity. Instead, we judge it. We go, oh, stop being so sensitive, or you're too sensitive. But the truth is, being sensitive is a great gift if you can manage it. Right? Because it means that you are perceiving things that everybody else is perceiving, but you're more aware of it, which means that you could take steps sooner, that you can recognize, oh, there's all this stuff going on and I'm really feeling it. I need to take care of myself. I need to step out. I need to get away from the crowd. I need to go for a walk. I need to take a nap. I need to drink water. I need to eat healthier food. I need to do something to really take care of myself in a physical or emotional way. So you know, if you've got friends who are sensitive, follow their lead, because they're feeling what maybe you can't feel. It's affecting you too. But they're feeling it first. So I honor the sensitive people and encourage them to find ways to make that an asset in their life rather than
a liability. And that is one of the biggest challenges for intuitives, artists, creatives, healers. It's like you do have that gift. And one of the biggest pieces in intuitive development training is emotional clearing, so that you can allow yourself to be who you are and still be the grown-up in the room, especially in times like these, or in moments like we're all having now, where things are so contentious and polarized, and where we're struggling to solve the problems that lie before us because we're all too upset and we don't communicate well. And so again, it's I hate to keep saying give yourself permission, but give yourself permission to be here now. Like Ram Dass said, be here now. Just be here now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, before I feel like we're almost ready to jump into some of the particulars about how to reach the idea of discernment is something we really want to stress with people. But we're at 40 minutes, and I'd like to take a moment and ask our wonderful assistant and techie goddess from Austin, Texas, Audrey, is there anybody asking a question at this point? If not, we're just going to keep going. So I'm just going to ask first.
Perfect.
Okay, no questions at the moment.
Thank you.
We're gonna keep going. And so, Beth, what I'd like to do is jump in and talk about giving people some real guidelines on how to seek out help. And we love this word discernment, so that's going to get brought up now. Beth, I'm going to let you start with this whole idea of seeking help and the different layers of seeking help.
Yeah. Again, it starts with just kind of being able to be present with yourself and your reality and your daily life, and understand where your limits are. Like, I have a client who, after like the first 6 months of the lockdown, was like, okay, I've gained 30 pounds. I am past the point I said I would never pass. And I'm clear. Literally what she said to me was, I'm clear, I'm eating my feelings. And so it was like, okay, good. You know, this was good. It wasn't just that, you know, she was menopausal or had other physical things. Like, we ruled all that out, and it's like, okay. And part of that is looking at your own self. Part of that has to do with feedback from others. But when you realize you're struggling, it's really important to be particular and smart, safe and smart about who you reach out to for what. And an example from my own life was in the depths of a depression I had. I was shocked at how people would just tell me to get over it. People who loved me, my best friends, the women who were the bridesmaids at my wedding, you know, and it was just like, whoa, I didn't expect that. And then later I came to find out there's a large body of research about how Americans seek help. And that one of the most common things people do is one of the most unhealthy things people do, which is they rely only on friends and family for mental health advice and coaching and support. And then they wonder why they don't get better. It's like, okay, our families and our friends and our community members love us. However, you know, rarely do we have the grace and the benefit of having a whole bunch of mental and physical health professionals in our immediate family or extended family. And so one of the most common things I see is that people come in and they're really upset because they were trying to reach out for help to a parent or an in-law or a roommate or a best friend, and kind of felt like shot down.
Right.
And you know, the onus is on us as individuals to have discernment in two key areas. One of them is this person really educated and enlightened and emotionally intelligent enough to help us with this problem? Are they going to be able to listen? Are they going to be able to hear it? Or would there be a better choice? 90% of the time, there's a better choice. And you may not always want everybody in your family or your apartment complex to know what all your problems are, you know, because of a variety of issues. So the first level of discernment is just choosing who to share with. But the second level of discernment has to do with how you set yourself up for success verbally. you know, checking in to make sure if you found the right person, is now a good time? Do you have a minute? I really want your opinion about something. I really need to share something with you. And I would love your full attention, and I don't want you to feel pounced on or like a hostage situation, you know? And so there's kind of two key places where it can break down. And again, if you've had these experiences, if you're having these experiences, it's a learning. You're not bad and wrong. You're just learning, and there's help available. And so just steer more towards the mental and physical health professionals and get dialed in, tuned up, and then the levels of intimacy that you will have with the people that are the most important to you will be better and easier to come by, because that's the keys to the kingdom. That's what we all want.
Right, right. And there's also on the faith and religious level as well. If you're a member of a congregation, most religious religions have some kind of a ritual for grieving. And you and I were talking about this before. You know, I find that I like to take rituals from my own spiritual background,
right?
And not just use them in the way they were designed to, but use them in a way that's meaningful to me.
Right.
So if I was taught a prayer that's good under these circumstances traditionally, but I found it very meaningful to just take it on at different times for myself, because I found it valuable, because it helped me get present. It helped me be appreciative. And so I would take that piece of my tradition and use it in a way that was meaningful for me. Now, this is outside of a congregation. This is on my own. But for me, and it brings me that peace and that centering. So yes, there's your faith and your religion, your religious leaders, your religious congregations. Those are good places to go to look for help, but also don't hesitate to take those rituals and find a way to use them that's really meaningful and creative for yourself. I also think that the more people really recognize that they're in a deeply emotional, painful state, that doing good things for yourself physically is a great place to start.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, it can be as simple as learning a basic breathing technique, or learning a couple of yoga moves, or, you know, just walking around the block, or getting some good water.
My gosh. One of the things that's blowing me away is all the people on social media who are yoga teachers, Pilates teachers, sports trainers, whatever. And like every day, every other day, they'll post just a couple of minutes of one or two exercises or stretches. And that comes up in my feed. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can stop and take a breath and try and do that, or something similar.
Right.
You know, we have these reminders now that, again, the world is different, and we have to be present, you know, and adaptable.
Exactly. Discernment is I love that term, because I think when you say use your judgment, judgment has come to have a negative connotation. We say, oh, you're so judgmental. Don't be so judgy. But there's judgment, like, I'm going to cross the street and I judge that there's traffic coming.
Right.
Wait, that's a judgment. But there's also this idea of discernment, and discernment has a softer feeling.
Tone.
I say to my patients, I say, use discernment when it comes to people that you choose to communicate with, especially when it comes to really important things in your life. You know, you look over there and you say, you know, is this person really open to this kind of conversation? Do they have the capacity to listen to this kind of information? And it's not a problem if they don't. You just recognize, I don't think this is the person to share this piece with. But over here, I have experienced this person. They've listened to me over the years. They always love me, always accept me, always, there's no judgment. And you know, there's that unconditional feeling that you can say anything. That's a discernment. You go in that direction. And I think that's something, you know, that's a skill that you develop. And you sometimes learn it the hard way. Like you reached over and you shared and you got whatever put down or judged or criticized, but or at the very least, you didn't get what you needed. So sometimes it's a hard lesson.
It is. And there's shortcuts. as you were speaking, it reminded me of a tool that I learned a while back, and in assessing how well you're reading the room and how well what you're sharing is going over, and it's literally share, check, share. I love stuff that is so elementally simple like that, but you don't, like a lot of us now spew for a long time, and we don't have the kind of conversations that we used to. And the impetus here is to speak in smaller chunks, check in verbally with the person. Is this, do you follow me? Is this okay to talk about? Or am I making you comfortable or uncomfortable? Do you know anything about this? Is now a good time? But also, like, check their body language.
Right.
You know, if they're backing away from you, or they're crossing their arms or something, or if they're like, you know, deer in the headlights, you know, that is meaningful. That's information. That's data that now isn't the right time with this particular human. And so again, just in some of these basic stages, there's a lot of tools out there to be had that can shorten your process, shorten your learning curve with fewer bumps and bruises, you know, and that's what we like.
Right. And there's a story I wanted to share from my personal practice that had to do with how sometimes when you're grieving or you're in a very powerful emotional state, and it seems like you're just not getting over it. You know, where someone says, I lost a loved one, 5 years ago, and the intensity of my grieving is just as much as it was 5 years ago. There's no shift in it. There's no coming and going. There's none of that sort of relief. I had a woman come to see me, and she'd lost a precious animal that she'd had for years. I believe it was a horse. Yeah. And it was 10 years prior, and she was still in as much excruciating pain 10 years afterwards as the day she lost that animal. And what we discovered in doing the emotional clearing work was that this current grieving was actually reminding her of something traumatic from her past that was anchored in her nervous system, like we talked about how the body holds on to the memory of trauma. And once we were able to clear that childhood memory, her grief was finally able to resolve to a more normal level and finally move on. So that's something to be aware of in yourself, that you might be carrying some old traumatic memory in your nervous system that's keeping you anchored in something. You can expect over time, when you're grieving, no matter how big the loss, that eventually it starts to diminish and change and lessen and lighten and come and go. And if it's not doing that, then chances are it's causing that pain, that current pain and that current loss is triggering something from the past. I know we're getting close to the end here, but I did want to mention one other piece, which is that, in general in our culture, we're not very comfortable with death.
No.
Remember growing up and as a young child coming home from school, and my neighbor came out, all the mothers, none of the mothers in my neighborhood were working mothers. This was a very different time.
Right.
And
right.
My neighbor came out, the mother of the kids next door came out, and I could tell by her face that something was wrong. And she said, I just wanted you to know your parents aren't at home because your Uncle Lou passed away. Right. And looking back, I was maybe 10, maybe 11. We weren't allowed to go to the funeral. We weren't talking about that at home. We weren't checking in with my father who lost his brother. I mean, it was just not dealt with or discussed. Now, I do believe parents today are much more conscious about dealing with death with their children, but there's still a discomfort in our culture in general around death and dying. And there are a lot of people in the spiritual realm of life who have this notion of there not being death, that the soul is eternal and it goes on forever, who don't even like to use the word death or dying. It's transitioning, passing on.
Right.
Which is all fine. But there's also a level of not wanting to really, really, feel the depth of the notion of dying and death.
Be present.
You have anything? You see anything do you agree with that, or?
Right. Well, and especially, again, it's better and different now than it was when you and I were growing up.
Yes.
And again, different nationalities, different religions, different cultural traditions deal with that differently. Also, different walks of life. I was raised in the military, and during Vietnam, and like we didn't talk about the guys who died. You know, we just got quiet and deep. You know, and I know there was a similar thing during the AIDS epidemic. Like, it wasn't okay to talk about people who died from AIDS, and so I am so very grateful that it is better now,
Right.
but it is still a challenge for people. And I see this a lot working with families of people with an elderly family member, again, circling back around to that Capricorn energy that's so powerful and profound right now. Capricorn rules the elders and the wisdom of the elders and the traditions of the elders. And, you know, it's hard to plan for mama's passing. It's hard to do mama's medical directive and the medical power of attorney if mama don't want to talk about the possibility that she's going to die. Right. And so it just gets complicated. So you have to get creative. You have to learn how to kind of surround the dragon and work with, you know, get everybody on the same page and come up with a strategy, and different things are going to work for different families. And it reminds me of that nevertheless she persisted, you know, or in the I Ching, they always say persistence furthers, you know, and sometimes it's just baby steps. But again, you know, if you don't get the result you want the first time, you haven't lost, you just have more data. You know, you have an idea of what doesn't work and where you're triggered, you know, and it's like, okay, let's calm down and commit to being the grown-up in the room and having calm, rational adult conversations about tricky topics, and then try again another day with a different strategy.
Beth, thank you so much. We have come to the end of our wonderful conversation, and it's just a beginning conversation. I want to let people know that we talked a lot today about grief and about missing things, but next time when we get together, we're going to go into even more of the, you know, emotional pain and struggle that people are going through during this pandemic, and we're going to do a lot of different layers. And we are going to be together again on Friday, March 18th at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Again, that's Friday, March 18th for part 2 of mental health in the time of COVID. If you do have questions or comments, please feel free to leave them, and we will answer them at the next session. Also, what I will have ready for everyone by that next conversation is I will have an emotional clearing program available for sale for people who would like to do some emotional clearing work based on the emotional trauma that people have been going through in the last 2 years. To learn more about emotional clearing than we discussed today, I have a website, the Emotional Clearinghouse. Feel free to check that out. Basically, emotional clearing is a very gentle and powerful technique that I guide you through in these programs to help you find and release where your body is holding on to stored emotional trauma. It's very freeing. It's very helpful for increasing your health and well-being. And my dear friend Beth is available as a consultant and as an astrologer and as a corporate intuitive. She does wonderful work. Beth, would you like to say anything about your availability during this time? Especially, you do a lot of work with crisis management as well.
I do a lot of crisis management. As much as I love working with the Virgos and the people who are like self-contained and planning ahead, you know, most of the times people call me when something has gone not gone according to plan and that kind of thing. What I love about right now is there are no planets retrograde. So it is a time when we can get great traction.
Yes.
And so and so that's part of what has my phone ringing a lot right now is people like, it's like horses at a horse race. They're shooting out of the gate and then getting a little surprised or frustrated by what they're finding. And so it's a good time to start moving forward on whatever your plans, your goals, your intentions, your New Year's resolutions were for this year. It is the spring, you know, and step into that. And, you know, if it goes great, great. If it doesn't, call me, we'll figure it out.
Exactly. So anyway, everyone, thank you so much, Beth, for being here with me. It's
Thank you.
always a pleasure, always. And again, this topic of conversation today has been mental health in the time of COVID. We will be discussing this again on March 18th at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you have questions or comments, please leave them. And we will be posting this interview on YouTube for my YouTube channel, which is Emotional Clearinghouse. And Beth, this will be available through your social media as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Terrific. So thank you. Thank everyone for being here. Thanks to our wonderful assistant, Audrey, for all her tech help, which Beth and I are not exactly adept in this arena. So we're more than happy to have her wonderful.
Yeah.
Support.
Yeah.
So
eternally grateful. Yeah.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.